Hey everyone, so we're just gonna get started. Kim's almost here, but we have other people presenting. Oh, she's here! Yay! Woo! I did it. Sorry guys. No worries. Well, hi, I'm Caroline. I'm one of the co-organizers here. I'm really, really excited about this panel. I actually have a background in photography and technology, and I've been following Kim's work for a while, and Jenna's work, and Dorothy's work. And the one thing I've been finding really fascinating as a photographer who now works in technology is the way in which photography becomes really decontextualized, as well as identity, especially in social media, but in spaces like Tumblr. So, like, meme culture is a good example of that. Like, an image or something that's created by someone will often get disassociated from the creator and then has a whole life onto itself. So the thing is known, but not necessarily the person that made it. So hopefully this panel will probably cover aspects of that, but I'm just really excited to be in conversation with these three amazing women. If y'all want to introduce yourselves. Yeah. You want to grab that one, Dorothy?
Hi, my name is Dorothy Santos. I'm a Bay Area-based writer. What else am I? Editor and a curator.
Cool. I'm Jenna Wortham, and I'm a technology reporter and columnist for the New York Times, and right now I'm working for the New York Times Magazine.
Hi, I'm Kim Drew. By day, I work at the Met doing social media for the museum, and then when I'm not at the Met, I'm working on a blog called Black Contemporary Art that I started on Tumblr in 2011.
Great. So Dorothy, do you want to start with your talk, your presentation? Sure. Great. Let's. Feel free to live Snapchat.
All right, so I'm talking a little bit. I mean, all three of us are talking a little bit about our Tumblr in a different way, but I'm talking about Tumblr today as a medium, not as the platform medium, but as a medium, obviously, for artistic practice. And what do I mean by medium? I mean more specifically the medium of Tumblr being used as an archive. So obviously, the artist that I'm going to be talking about today, using it as a form of taxonomy. I mean, I know obviously that in science it's a form of classification, but that's the way that these artists have used it as such and as an archive. What I mean by meta practice is in Tim Roseborough, who's another Bay Area-based artist, and I'm sorry I didn't realize my presentation's very Bay Area, West Coast heavy. I totally did not mean that, so unintentional, but Tim Roseborough. And thank you. And Tim Roseborough talks about meta practice being this idea of, an after practice, or making the process of creation transparent for the viewer or participant. And then I also talk about sorry, now I'm confusing it. Tumblr being used as a medium for meditation, endurance, and ritual. And so what does that mean? That means this, honestly, like, Tumblr lends itself really well to kind of sharing, and whether that's photos or video, et cetera, and reblogging, there's kind of something ritualistic to that, and you'll see that more in like Kate Durbin's work, who I'm going to be talking about. And the last but not least is Tumblr being used as a form of expanding on conceptual art. And what I mean more specifically by that is performance. So the three artists I'm going to talk about are Kate Durbin, Jenny Odell, and Stephanie Saihuko. And so first I wanted to talk about Women as Objects by Kate Durbin. This is a project she did from 2010 to 2013, where she basically curated in real time. Like, she would wake up ritualistically and she would look at this kind of teen girl aesthetic, and she would just reblog kind of incessantly what she found really fascinating. And she would not analyze the images, she would just reblog them, reblog, etc. And so from a 2013 interview she did with Alicia Eller for Hyperallergic, she actually talks about why she selected Tumblr. So she says, initially I was drawn to Tumblr because of the unique potentials of the interface. I see it as evolving art and culture in important ways. That teenagers are the primary users, that they are hijacking symbols from pop culture and disrupting their meaning. These teens are at the forefront of trend making, but also trend warping, effectively and publicly revealing the man behind the curtain. And so I kind of wanted to share a couple of the images that I curated from her curation. I still do, Lisa Frank. And then kind of speaking to this, this GIF, since GIFs are also very popular, amongst everyone, actually. But just this vintage photograph of something that we're all familiar with. And then who doesn't like a glittery, shining uterus? I know I do. That sounds kind of weird. Anyway, and I highly encourage you to, I put the actual Tumblrs there so you can visit them. I highly encourage you to kind of scroll through them and see the project. And again, it's Kate is engaging in this cultural criticism. She's an artist as curator and also performance. And I can explain that in Q&A because I know I'm kind of running out of time and I don't want to take too much time away from these wonderful women here. And engaging in kind of post-internet practices, which I'll talk about. The Bureau of Suspended Objects by Jenny Odell is a project that she did, well, let me back up. A project that she did at SF Ecology, which is basically San Francisco city dump. She was there for 3 months and she curated garbage. And so, and this talk about pre-meta internet, she actually did everything IRL, obviously, curating all of this garbage, but then she actually talked about, for Fusion, for those of you, she did a piece for the publication, and she actually said, one unexpected side effect of my project was the object's zombie-like continuance as images on the internet, as a result of the Bureau of Suspended Objects Tumblr page. Now searching for a specific item and scrolling through a sea of product photos or eBay snapshots, you might happen upon a trashed version of the object, the version someone selling it wouldn't want you to think about. And so this is only a snippet of her June 2015 archive of what she curated at the dump. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this project is she actually used Tumblr in this really, and I mentioned the word taxonomy, she did it in this really scientific manner. Like she actually every day sat at the dump, had her laptop with her, and she would look up the name, any other name that the product would go under, provenance, who invented it, etc. And it's also a really massive book, which is really entertaining for anyone who's interested in that. But again, her practice of using Tumblr as an archivist, a social scientist, a meta practice, because there's transparency in the practice, but also methodology as art practice. And the last person I wanted to talk about was she's become actually a mentor for me, Stephanie Saihuko, and her project called Speculative Propositions. And I'm over time, I'm so sorry. And Speculative Propositions by Stephanie Saihuko, and it's really strange because this is the only project out of the 3 that is ongoing. So she's been doing this for a minute. And she describes the project as a digital archive of unrealized project proposals, some unsolicited, some solicited, some rejected, some purely speculative and conceptual in nature and never meant to actually exist. And so I wanted to show a project. I know it's super, and I hate this because my day job is very corporate and I don't like it when people say, these slides are really busy. I know they are, but I wanted to show them anyway because I wanted you to see kind of the magnitude of she's really genuinely posting these grant applications and residencies that she's done. I wanted to show intentionally a rejected one. So this is the one that she submitted an application for. It was a fellowship at UC Berkeley. She's an associate professor there in sculpture in the art department. And it was rejected, not accepted. And, I wanted to show it as a practice of, the artist and the imaginary, because she also has projects that she never submitted, but she has the entire project narrative posted on Speculative Propositions on Tumblr, where you can technically go and, you could pilfer her Tumblr for this is what successful applications look like. And just for the record, and I've told my students this as well, is she put her, and it was successful, she put her Guggenheim Fellowship application, which she received in 2014, it's in its entirety on this Tumblr. And so again, I just wanted to kind of show something where it's the artist and the imaginary, this idea of speculative practice, and something I know that all 4 of us, are going to talk about later, this idea of authorship. So the last thing I'll say is the future of Tumblr, and something that I wanted to discuss with Jenna and Caroline and Kim is what happens when the platform changes or the medium changes. Obviously, this platform more specifically, a lot of these platforms come from this hacker culture or this idea where we're not going to corporatize, we're not going to monetize this thing's just going to be for the people. And then all of a sudden Yahoo buys Tumblr. And then, but what has been created that can stand separately and outside the ecosystem. And I'm not just saying this because I'm fangirling you, Kim, but when she started it, Black Contemporary Art, I followed it. And this is one of that was one of the Tumblrs that made me feel, oh, this is legit. Because I started my Tumblr in 2010, and I was like, as no one's gonna read my Tumblr. But I did it anyway because I was like, this is a new format for me. What am I gonna do? And then your Tumblr was actually the first one that I started really legit, like, looking at. And I kind of wanted to dig into that a little bit more because the second question is obviously related to that. And then the third thing that I wanted to talk about was this idea of cultural, social, and historical appropriation and what it actually means when we attribute artworks and when we don't, and what that looks like, especially in practices like Stephanie's. And that's it. Thank you. And then if you want to keep in touch, there's my Instagram and Twitter. And thank you so much for your attention. Sorry for going over.
Don't apologize. That was great. Good clap. Oh.
That was great. Well, I don't have so much of a presentation, except I wanted to take a moment or two to talk about my practice through my work as a journalist and kind of why I think I was invited to be on this amazing star-studded panel today. So I'm a reporter for the New York Times, and right now I'm working for the Times Magazine, but for a long time I was a startup reporter covering companies like Tumblr and Facebook and Instagram and kind of following their trajectories. They started out as tiny, ventures in a garage before they become these large-scale infrastructure institutions that they are today. And as part of my work, I look at these companies and I write about them, but I'm also trying to understand, too, when they start, they all have this very particular kind of seemingly platform-neutral or policy-neutral ethos. We're just here to make the world better. We want to connect people. We want to do interesting things. And it's never really about that. I mean, for the most part, it's pretty clear that most of them are on a uphill or downhill slide, depending on how you look at it, path to liquidity, which usually means taking the work that people are putting onto their services and finding a way to turn it into something that's close to profitability. So what does that mean for people who then embody their life's work or their practices and somehow incorporate these services, which we all do, which we've all done and we all do, when they are using these services in a way that starts to resemble something that feels like a lifeline or utility, like an electric company or a water company. So that's I spend a lot of my time thinking about that and looking at that and trying to analyze it and not necessarily buy into kind of the party line that they like to feed the press about what they'd like to do. The flip side of that is the thing I've also become really interested in is kind of, this is more broadly about appropriation, I guess, but sort of trying to understand how trends and ideas and things move in waves across the internet. And I think you see this a lot in fashion where, a certain look will sort of start to trend on Pinterest or on Instagram, and then all of a sudden you're seeing it on the streets of New York. And I'm really fascinated by that kind of cultural contagion and kind of what that looks like. From an art perspective, I'm extremely, extremely, extremely fascinated in the way that because everything exists online and because we can right-click, because we can screenshot, because we can, take a screen capture of an object or an image or an idea, that then it becomes somehow ours or we have a right to it. And the way that the internet strips away that context, and the way when things go viral, they tend to multiply and mutate until we don't know where they came from anymore. And sometimes that's very cool. Like, the other day, I should have asked you, because you would probably know, but I texted a friend and was like, what is this meme that says, like, don't ever talk to me and my son again? And I was like, what is that from? Is that a Drake lyric? What is that? And then I went to know your meme, and it's actually a riff from a Cowboy Bebop. And it's not even from the show. Someone took a screen grab of something from Cowboy Bebop, doubled it, and then wrote, don't ever talk to me and my son again. And I was so overjoyed by that. And it's a moment when you realize that there is this culture of collaboration and this culture of a lingua franca that we're all learning to speak, a fluency that's so fun, and that's the kind of thing I love, and that's what gives me hope for the future, But I really feel sharing a lot about my inner monologue here, but that's the kind of thing that makes me really excited about the internet. And so you have that on one side of the coin, and then you have something else on the other side where people see something they like on Instagram and screenshot it and repost it and don't credit where it came from, whether it's a joke, an idea. There are people who make large amounts of money doing this, and sort of what are the rules around that, and how do we sort of say, like, we all know if you torrent a movie or a song, that's stealing, but when is it stealing when you're screenshotting something? And so trying to think about how we talk about that so that artists and people who are making things that are meant to live online aren't able to make a living because of it is something that I'm really interested in investigating, whether it's through the technosocial framework that we all use to access the internet, or it's tools that we're building, or general rules of etiquette that we're trying to enforce and pass around. Those are the areas, I guess that's how I think about my work right now, and that's how I'm approaching it from the topic of appropriation. Okay, thank you.
I love it. So I'm having a difficult time trying to figure out where to start. There's so much to be said on this topic, and I have been working and living in Tumblr world since about 2010. When I joined the platform, I was just using it as a personal user, sharing images of myself and my friends and some art here and there that I enjoyed. I was an undergraduate at Smith College, and it wasn't until I went and did an internship in the summer of 2010 at the Studio Museum in Harlem that everything kind of shifted for me. I went to the museum and had been in the nascent stages of an art history major, was still trying to figure out what to do. And once I had arrived at the museum, and like from the first day that I was there, I was learning artist names, like upwards of 15 to 20 artist names a day. And I just could not believe that I wasn't encountering these names elsewhere. And because I had already been such a power Tumblr user, like very silently, I had like 100 followers on my personal account. I knew that Tumblr would be a good place for such things because it has this very reciprocal relationship. Every time you log on, especially in Tumblr at that time period, it was like 2010, 2011, the algorithm wasn't super hefty yet. So there was still a lot of discovery that was happening quite naturally. And so I decided to take to that platform. I began with just posting the artists that I knew, and then invited other people to participate, and it became this like wonderful collaborative effort, this quilt of Black creativity that I have continued to work on for the past 5 years. One thing that I think is really quite interesting for me and thinking about these conversations around appropriation is that there's always this associated guilt because I'm a person who broadcasts things. And so I'm making the artists that I'm bringing into this space susceptible to appropriation, susceptible to theft, susceptible to visibility that they may not be ready for. And so that's something that I'm always kind of thinking through, or thinking about someone like, there's this rapper, OG Mako, who, do you know, I can't remember the name of his song, but he like has this very like screamo kind of like rap style, but it's because he used to be a punk rock kid. But he switched from being a punk rock kid to being a rapper because it's cheaper to be a rapper. And he decided to use these particular platforms because that was what was available to him. And so then I wonder too, like being a person who is broadcasting the work of an underserved community, but then putting them on this particular platform because I have the agency to do so, like what does that look like? And how can I, as a person who is communicating on behalf of other people, be as generous to their voices as possible? Because sometimes I have it where someone is, I'll discover something or I'll find a work in progress, for example. I don't know it's a fucking work in progress. Like I just follow this person on Instagram and I share and credit their name, but they weren't quite ready for it to be out there like that. And then they're open to this level of criticism that they weren't quite accounting for. And so what does that mean? What do I and what do people in power do to be able to communicate on behalf of other people? And how can we make that conversation both generative, sensitive, and considerate of like this particular internet moment? When I started the blog 5 years ago, I had literally no idea that people were going to follow it. I had no idea that it would be, considered a digital institution. And so now these are the questions that I'm thinking through. It's not always inherently good to tell people things. It's like I think a lot about the ways in which culture travels and the ways in which people can be forgotten by time. But it's like, who is doing the forgetting? Whose eyes matter more than others? And how do we associate that around conversations of value and around understanding that these individual histories have agency and have like the right to this inertia and opacity that cannot be denied. So that's kind of like where my head is at today.
Awesome. There's so much there and so many things I think rife to start with. Something I think about a lot about because my background is in photography and it was also in like ownership of photography. So like, how do you register images with the Library of Congress? What happens when your images are taken without your consent, without your knowledge? Things of that nature. And so I went to school, like I graduated in 2010, so it was right before Instagram, and it was when like Tumblr was becoming, like people were on it and people were becoming Tumblr famous, but it wasn't, I would say like quite yet like the institution that it is now. And so it's something I think a lot about with like Richard Prince's work, for example, and Instagram, of like what is this sort of opt-in and I guess like creating art even out of other people's work, and like what is that kind of like de-amplification? Like he has a platform. His platform is not on Tumblr, but he has, or on Instagram, but he has a very large platform, and it extends way beyond just even the digital spheres because of his marketing, his branding, and like his prestige, if you will. So that's something I've been sort of really intrigued about is like when we start to think about amplification, what also happens when like the artist is removed from their work, or rather, then also the work is other people's work, and it's taken, inspired, or remixed in a way. But like, what is that level of like remixing? Like I would say with Richard's Prince works, technically from a legal standpoint, it's wildly remixed because of like the way he was commenting. But it also was actually like someone else's complete another feed who had no way to consent into that.
Do you want to take a step back and say what it was?
Yeah, for sure. So Richard Prince, he did this recent round of work where he was commenting on different people's Instagrams, and from what I gathered, was just taking screenshots and then printing them, placing them in a gallery, which another institutionalized space. But the gallery was Gagosian, which is a very, very large gallery. There's different outputs of Gagosian like across the world. I think of it as like the Neiman Marcus of art galleries. That's the way I describe it to people. But he was selling this work for like $90,000, but also wasn't asking people if he could use it. From what I gathered, he also wasn't paying anyone for using their feeds at all. So he was sort of like trying to comment on, I think, internet society and internet culture in a way that I think was actually much more appropriating, and I think probably degrading to everyone's feed who he had captured.
You want to start, Dorothy?
I don't mind saying something controversial about him. He's not going to come after me anyway. The first thing that comes to my mind is like digital colonialism, because that to me, that starts to really kind of, dig into what people, even Sadette, I know I'm kind of crossing over to panels and, what she was talking about in regards to like this digital labor that people don't know that they're engaging in. And I remember reading the Guardian pieces and seeing what his work was like. And the first thought that came to mind is, how is this, it's intentionality, but also how is it contributing to the larger conversation of, what people are producing online, how they're sharing it. I think also I'm just not the biggest fan of his work, and I think a lot of it is, it's not contributing to that discussion. And so for me, there wasn't much more to say about it other than I don't know. It's a little bit lazy to say, well, I'm just commenting on internet culture and hyperconnectivity. No, you're not, because if you're charging $90,000 for no, just that's it. No.
I like to start that right.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of value in the way we recontextualize modern life, and there's a long tradition of artists who've done that. Andy Warhol, for one. Lots of artists have spent their time. That's the most immediate and obvious example, but a lot of artists have spent their time trying to pick apart the way we live now and kind of what it means. But I also think that it has its limits, and I think that that's not. It's not the same thing, and it's not harming Campbell's soup if you're taking their soup and putting it on a pedestal. It's certainly really egregious. It's not really analogous in the same way. And then you think about the dynamic that's being set up between an artist like Richard Prince and then someone who's making work. I forget what the images were of, but if they were artwork or just personal images, but I can't remember. Yeah, but just the idea, and in some cases he did actually take people's work and reuse it. Yeah, and so I think in that way it's basically, to me it feels blatant and total just copying and stealing, and probably, I don't know, I find that to be really hard to kind of excuse. And I think the term remix has actually become so overused that it's lost its meaning, and we kind of use it as this blanket term. Because we're to sort of justify it as sort of something under, Creative Commons that we're doing. And it's not, there is a lot of validity to things being sampled and remixed, and that's happened all the way back to the earliest composers, but it's not the same thing if it's not a collaboration and there isn't kind of a direct lineage back to sort of, there is inside of like a annotated footnotes about who's profiting. And then just the entire system of sort of being a white male artist, taking the work of people who aren't as established or as good as you are, or as like, not, I shouldn't have said as good, but like who aren't as far along in their careers or aren't as well known, and then using that to then turn around and make a profit is really despicable to me. I don't know. I'm
I'm like coming to terms with my capitalism and or my interest in such things. And I don't necessarily think that him monetizing it is the issue, because of course he's an artist and of course he's going to and I'm sure he doesn't set his own prices. I'm sure that Larry Gagosian was like, we're going to sell these for this. This is how this is going to break down. This is what the commission looks like. There's not a lot of agency on the artist side. I'm sure Richard Prince is a different position because he's more of an established artist. I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with him monetizing the work, but I do think that there is something very, very wrong with trying to perform a false intentionality, which I think that the internet affords us the ability to do. So you can present things and do the performance of wanting to make this grand statement, but unless you're actually doing the work with integrity, that's the issue. It's like the money part of it is like, that's just the game, that's just the art market, that's just how it works, and it's so much bigger than any of the parties involved. But there is an issue when he takes a screenshot of Jungle Pussy's Instagram, blows it up 10 times, and then doesn't invite her to the opening and doesn't engage in dialogue with that person. So I think that there's so many levels to which people are full of shit. But I don't think that that has anything to do with them wanting to make money off of the thing that they do, even if it is morally inept.
I mean, what's also sort of fascinating about this argument too is that it I hate to decontextualize things, but if we decontextualize the event of what Richard Prince was doing, screenshotting someone's work or commenting on it, what is the argument of art institutions posting artworks of other artists and things of that nature? And I think what makes this so much more muddy is the intentionality, it is the context. If you look at the guidelines of Twitter of posting other people's work or using other images that have existed, right? That's this kind of nebulous area Instagram and Tumblr don't necessarily want to get into, because it is a platform of amplification around images. So using other people's images, that's the gray area that they're let's not touch, but we're into it, right? But then you get into it removed what happens when it's taken off Instagram, and I think as Kim's saying, that's kind of the bigger issue with what happens when ownership of your feed, the realizations you actually don't own it, because we're existing on these platforms. So I don't actually own at Caroline Sinders on any of the platforms that I'm on, but that's never actually really articulated to me as a performer in that space or as a creator in that space, right? I think that's sort of the bigger issue with what Richard Prince was doing is he was exposing this lack of ownership in I think a pretty non-nuanced way. But the bigger issue I think around it was also just erasure as well, who he was picking and how, and it also happened to be Richard Prince. But what happens when it's flipped, when it's someone else I guess taking someone from the top of the power structure and appropriating their work in a way, and it becomes works of activism, which we need in those spaces. I guess what I'm getting at with this ramble is it's the context of it is so specific. Sorry, that was less of a question.
No, it's good, but I do think, it's this idea of ownership and sort of what's not articulated and what is articulated to us when we sign up for services. It's very clear. It's very clear that we don't own our content. We're just not used to thinking about it. There are terms of services which we don't read deliberately. They're deliberately long, they're deliberately thorough, and they're incredibly difficult to parse for an average person. And we're not really acclimated. I'm speaking very generally, but I think, I'll speak for myself. As an internet user, I'm not acclimated with, I'm very familiar with setting up an account, picking my username, which is my same username across all the platforms. I gotta get it, and I don't read the terms of service. I just click OK, and I want to start using it. And I'm not really thinking about what it means to be using that platform in that way. And I do think it kind of comes up, and we had this conversation around Twitter when we were talking about the image of a child of a person we both know who was being used to market get back into Twitter DMs or Twitter notifications or something, and it was very jarring. But it's of course, when you publish a picture of yourself or another person on any of these platforms, you don't have the ownership. And I don't know if the onus is on us to behave better or for the technology services and the companies to take that into consideration, but they don't, because that's their entire monetization. That's what they do. This is they're using all this information about what we like and where we go and who we are and what we do to make money, and that's the system that we're buying into. Now, I'm a total anarchist when it comes to these kinds of things. I think we should be building our own services. I think we should be using our own services and only protecting. I think we should be protecting our content in a very different kind of way. I don't think that's possible, and I think it's very difficult to sort of get exposure and to even be a journalist. I don't own half the things I write, and I'm constantly pushing stuff out so people will read it across all these platforms. I'm constantly giving these social networks and services free content so people will see my work. I mean, it's, the system's rigged and we're all a big part of it. But I definitely think that the agency is there. We're just sort of engaging in it in a way that makes it hard to kind of, understand what's happening when we do post our things to these services as artists, as performers, as just humans.
Yeah, I wish I had heard the other panel about labor, because it's something that I think a lot about, and a conversation that I have a lot, especially with people of color online, because so many memes, so many like major modernities online are generated by youth of color. It's just a fact. And so how do we think about that labor? What does that intentionality look like? What can the companies do to reward it? Is it something that should be rewarded? Is there a gain from virality? It's like there's this supreme interest in being seen. You check, you post a post on Instagram, and you've seen friends do it where they like post something and then you're like at brunch, but they're still just like refreshing and refreshing and refreshing to see how many people will interact with their content. And so there's just so many levels to which we respond to people responding to us and to being seen, and what that visibility looks like. And I often urge people, if it feels like labor, don't do it, which I know is like my very privileged position because I do it for work. Like all of the social media that I do, I get paid for. And so my position to all of these platforms is very different. But for me, it's like it's an exchange. When I post things if I post a status onto Facebook, or if I post, a picture, like it's Freeze Art Fair Week. I did a takeover for a hotel. When I post artworks, like I'm gonna get a free hotel room. Like I'm thinking about these kind of decisions, and I think what we all need to do collectively is think about what our labor looks like, how much value we put on it. Do you feel like you're being taken advantage of? Maybe you need to pull back. I mean, because that's the only choice that we really have. It's like once you put your media out there, you don't know how it's going to travel. It's like the post that Jenna was referring to. This journalist, her name is Jamila Lamo. Her daughter is gorgeous, beautiful, hilarious. She was crying because the sun was gone and she didn't want to share the sun with children around the world. And it became this like viral sensation. But she's 4, And it's kind of like, it's cool because her mom is a journalist and like is able to wrap her mind around what that virality means. And so like that consideration is there, but I think we all need to think about the potential for eyes and like what that looks like beyond just the numbers. Because I think a lot of times, too, I fall victim to it all the time, where I feel very desensitized to my followings or to the people that are interacting with me because I just think about them as digits, or I just think about it as data. And really it is about making very conscious decisions every time you choose to put your media out there, every time you choose to share your intellectual property, whatever the gravity of what that sharing looks like.
I was actually talking about this with Molly Soda the other day. Her name's Amalia. We went to undergrad together. Anyway, she was in Chicago and she was moving, and she threw out like a bunch of old test prints from undergrad, and she moved, and then she got notified that someone had found these prints and done a whole art show around her discarded work. But the only way people knew it was her work is because she inserts herself in her work, and we were talking about this idea of ownership and meme, which is really prevalent in her work, but it's because her face is the body of her work. And that's the only way that was ever known. And I was asking her, like, how did that feel? And a lot of it was just like, she's like, well, like, I'm in my work, so, like, people know it's mine. But if I wasn't in it, would anyone have known? Would this have been anything worth finding and, like, pulling out of the physical trash? And then to, like, I guess, in an IRL sense, like, reblog these discards.
I actually want to respond to that because, I mean, in thinking about Kate Durbin's work, for example, and how I remember I was asked to interview her for Public Art Dialogue and to talk about Hello Selfie, but I had to do research on her, and one of the things I discovered was women as objects. And that was one of the first things that came to mind, was like she's just kind of using it as a practice for a larger performance, which I didn't know about until, again, this research, where she did a performance piece called Pardon My Hormones, and it could be read any way you want it, but it was strange because she took all of the things that she curated and then brought them to life in this pool party, and it translated in the most unusual way, because it was like, when I watched the video documentation, my gut reaction was, oh, that GIF actually looks familiar. Oh my God, she's recreating what she curated, but then with her, because she is a writer. And that was one of the things where, a lot of people had that criticism of like, oh, okay, this is such a narcissistic culture, all this selfie culture. And I started looking at it, and it's reinserting the body in spaces that, are kind of rife with the things that we're so used to seeing in media to begin with. And so that was one of the kind of artworks that came to mind when you were talking about the body and kind of how Tumblr kind of facilitates that. And especially like, something that Kate mentioned to me was this idea of, well, because I asked her, I said, well, what about trans, women of color, for instance? And she says, oh no, I became really interested in the different ways that they were kind of showing up on Tumblr as well, and realizing that it was a place where you could really find that if you were looking for it. And the original purpose of Tumblr was to kind of create these little ecosystems or these microcosms on the internet that were also safe, because you're not always safe as an LGBTQ identified individual to be out in the world. So where could you do that? You could do that, on a place like Tumblr. And I think that's the reason why I'm so invested in looking at artists who use digital platforms, but then kind of make certain manifestations come to life in IRL performances or analog forms. So I think that's the reason why I showed some of the works I did today.
Well, I wanted to add one thing, which is that I think there are two things in competition, which is that there is this premium on originality on the internet, and we want to see fresh ideas. We want to know who has the best joke, the best take. Oftentimes, though, we're not the ones who come up with it, and I think that it's interesting in thinking about Tumblr and thinking about Kim's Tumblr that she created, because if you go to your Tumblr, if you're passing images around from it, you know exactly who the artist is, you know exactly where it came from. There is that annotation. Most of the software and the services that we're using now don't have that. So I think, there's something really interesting about this sort of idea of everybody wants to have the best thing, the coolest thing to share and to show, but none of the things that we use really have the infrastructure embedded in them to give credit back to where it came from. You can just repost. I'll see things on Vine created by someone who's watching their TV at the exact right moment, usually, and then someone I know who is in a much higher position of power on Twitter or something posted with a funny caption as if they made that or found it themselves. And it's like, well, there's no recourse there. I'm not going to DM this person. I could, but it's just so frustrating. And there's no mechanism inherently embedded that it negatively kind of reprimands you for doing that, unless someone calls you out, which is sort of the role I feel like journalists can have and critics as well. But I also think that there are just these things that are in competition, which is that we don't have a mechanism in place to protect things from that getting ripped off, basically. And we're in this position where we're all audience members. We're in this culture of looking, and we're in this culture of pretending that the things that we're looking at are probably, authentic, or we believe that they're from where they're supposed to be from. I don't know. It's just there's this desire for demand and to be seen as sort of, I feel like I'm having a hard time landing that last thought, but you know what I mean? I just feel like there's this economy of attention, and we don't have the things in place that kind of protect people who are the best at kind of grabbing that attention.
Yeah, I would agree. That was sort of the metaphor I was trying to make with Molly's work being taken, is that the only way she has ownership over it is by physically, or rather visually inserting herself in her work. That is her ownership. So then what happens, as you're saying, where you've created something but you're not in it at all?
Well, you have to watermark it, but then it
Right.
sort of it turns the experience of Instagram, let's say, for example, into a really, I was looking at something in that way where I have no idea what I saw or what it was of, but I remember right in the middle of it, this beautiful image was a giant, I know, it was a Beyonce Instagram blog, but someone had made a great image of Beyonce from the last 4 or 5 Met Balls, posing with herself, and right in the middle, they'd watermarked it, as they should have, because I forwarded it to everyone I knew on Instagram, but it's that's exactly the kind of thing that someone's going to screenshot and reshare as if they did it themselves. And so it's unfortunate, and it totally kind of messed up the flow of the image, but I was good for you, because you made this, and you should, and if it was at the bottom, it'd be cropped out. So there have to be some sort of, I don't know if it's a digital watermark. I don't even know if that's even possible with something like Instagram because of the way these phones work. But you have to sort of figure out mechanisms in place to prevent that.
The thing is, too, though, I think it's really a larger conversation, or just, I don't know, I'm excited right now because I think that there are a lot of conversations about digital conservation. And I think that the way that digital conservation is operating right now, we're probably 5 years behind in the workflow where we need to be. But I do think that there is some hope that, hopefully that as we're becoming more digital, as we're becoming more accustomed to seeing images online, that there will be a more sophisticated and cheap way to think about chip technology where you can have pixels that then mark things, like thinking about, that's one of the best things about a platform like Artsy. Artsy is this tech organization that is interested in educating people around art. But they also work with galleries, and they are major partners with art fairs, and so it's a great way for collectors who are interested in artworks to be able to purchase through the platform. Kind of similar to like Etsy, but it's just all art, and it's like 10 times more expensive. But one of the things that they're pushing on people who work in galleries or work in museums to put the images on their site is that if you put an image on Artsy, it's like hyper-coded. So if someone takes it and puts it onto Tumblr, they know. They can see the pixels, the way that they move with the image. You cannot divorce the two. And so I'm hoping that in the next, hopefully 3 to 5 years, that is a technology that will be integrated with a platform like Instagram as well, so that when people upload their native, like they're the first motherfucker to put that shit up, that it's paired together. And so it's like always, like my selfie always has @Museum Mammy somewhere in the code, because I think it's something that's totally feasible, but we're just not quite there yet.
But I like this conversation, and I think you're right, because we're at this really incredible moment when there is so much exciting digital creation that's happening and sharing that's happening. But that's never going to happen on something like Instagram unless people come together and say, like, there's no incentive for them to do it or put it into the technology whatsoever. Instagram 100% they want stuff to keep propagating in that way, because that's what makes us go back, because there's always something to look for. So there has to be, like, it's not going to happen organically is what I'm trying to say, because of capitalism, which I'm coming around to my, but it's, we're working on a book right now, big book project, but but I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're operating under this assumption that there's a set of rules about what is and isn't okay, and that everyone's going to follow them. It's not how it works. It's just not how things work. It's not how the internet works. It's not how the world works. And so I think we sort of like, and that's why the Richard Prince thing makes us like, we're like, ugh, but also like, okay, but also, ugh, it's like we can't really figure it out because it feels icky, but no one said it was wrong. And so there's no like sense that things aren't going to get better unless we apply the pressure, or someone applies the pressure to make them better. Because Artsy has a motivation, because if people can copy their artwork, no one's going to buy it from them. There's no such motivation for Instagram, because they don't sell things directly on their platform.
Well, also they're owned by Facebook, which has one of the worst policies around ownership of your images. Yeah. I wonder, is it questions from the audience?
Yeah, I actually wanted to, there's a phrase that you said, Jenna, the economy of attention, that caught my attention. And I was wondering, like, going back to, like, if you are like somebody who has a lot of followers on Twitter and you do tag a website someone's coded or like content someone's created, but like if you do click that link and go to like their bio, you can find all of that information about who the original artist is. You just have to jump through a lot of avenues and a lot of hoops to get there. And I was linking that to something that Kim was saying about how like when you're at somebody and they did just post a selfie on Instagram and they're constantly refreshing their page. I was thinking about the currency of like, it sounds horrible, but currency of self-worth. And if you, like when you're creating content and if it feels like work, don't do it, like that's totally valid, but like what if you're creating content and the value that you're getting out of it isn't necessarily monetary? It's like that sense of like, oh, what I've created is an impact because someone is interacting with it. Like, so what if Kate Winslet retweeted my tweet and hundreds of thousands of people thought it was hilarious? If they click enough times, they'll figure out I was the real person that made that tweet. But I'm not getting paid for it. But people saw it and interacted with it. I was wondering what you had to say about, I guess, like the economy of self-worth.
Yeah, it's something that I think a lot about, especially for myself as a product in many ways online, because a lot of, when I was starting the blog, it was all about the blog, it was all about the artists. And in the last 2 years, I've really been putting my face out there and been putting myself and my ideas out into the world. And for me, I think it's really important to be hyper present because I'm a queer Black woman working in the arts. And I want that, like the amount of space that I take up within that identity to make room for other people to come after me. I want to present the possibility of my existence to other people. And so for me, that visibility is really great and wonderful. But for example, one thing that's been like kind of messing my brain up this week is that I work at the Met, and I worked at the Met Gala, and my face is in a lot of pictures of Lupita, of Emma Watson, of all these other celebrities, and people are like, oh, tagging me, and they're like, oh, Kim, you're in this picture, and it's like, yeah, that's awesome, but like nobody knows who the fuck I am. You know, like you guys know because you know me, but I'm not like getting any, you know, there's no real exchange from being posted, my face being posted on Calvin Klein amongst this other sea of paparazzi people, all working. Well, you're working. Yeah, and I'm working. And so for me, it's something that I think is really difficult, and it really is about like what you really want from these platforms. A lot of times people have conversations about unplugging and how we should unplug and how we need to like run through a field of daisies and not update on Twitter. And I think that that's total bullshit. Like I think that screen time is a myth. I think that being really proficient on these platforms leads us towards this place of eloquence on these platforms that I think is more healthy than trying to pretend like they're not valuable to us. And in the meantime, it really is about figuring out what your goal is. So for me, as a person who's interested in visibility, yes, I'm all down. Like I'm gonna post my selfie. I'm like gonna, you know, tweet and at Jenna because I know Jenna is gonna retweet me because she has like 10 times more followers than I'll ever have. So those are things that I think about like with my intention. But then it you know, sometimes it does happen where I'm like kind of not down with my face being there and like not being, my name not being there too. That's something I'm very sensitive to, and I didn't realize until this week. And so it really is about. I think it's an ongoing. I don't think that there's I don't have an answer to your question, but it's something that I'm definitely thinking through constantly.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a comment to that, which is to say that I mean, part of the reason I write about the internet and I write about startups and I write about social media is because I fucking love it. Like I spend all my time, like I told Kim the other day, well, I told you via Facebook, but I was like, my favorite thing is when my phone blows up and it's like, Kim Drew is mentioned on Facebook. I'm like, yay! Like I love it. Like I love the way, and I'm with Kim. Like I'm totally of the thing that like, I spend a lot of time on my phone. I spend a lot of time not on my phone. There isn't a higher value on one or the other. It's just a different use of my time. And I have friendships that are fostered. Zoe, my girlfriend who's here, knows I have a very large group of friends who are only internet friends, and I make her hang out with them sometimes. And she's like, "This is very weird, because these are people you only talk to online." And she's like, "How long has this been going on?" I'm like, "Years." And she's like, "Interesting." But you know, like I am someone who values that. Like I'm someone who doesn't place a hierarchy on digital versus non-digital. I think there's value in all of it, and that's why this is my job. You know, but I'm also really aware that, for me, it can only be fun. Like I'm not trying to build a career by posting things that I've written or making them known. I'm very privileged to work in a very well-known institution where I have the benefit of access. Like I have that behind me, and that's not something that I've ever really had to. I mean, within the last couple of years, you know, I haven't ever really had to work to be seen or work for that attention. That's been given to me. And so I'm just hyper aware. And I also look, when I go into my job at working at the New York Times, I look around and I'm like, you know, there are a lot of women, but there aren't a lot of people of color. There are not a lot of perspectives that are being considered necessarily all the time. And so I'm aware of even the limitations of that platform. So it just makes me kind of go work backwards and think more about like, well, how are these same hierarchies then repeated on all these different social networks, and how does sort of our desire to be seen and this sort of idea of worth, whether it's internalized or, I mean, people get jobs by being good on Twitter, you know, like that's a real thing. And so trying to understand how that works, how algorithms work, how different things rise to the top and things get pushed to the bottom is something that I'm always thinking about. And so I don't know. I mean, I do think, I don't know if this answers your question, but I guess I don't want to devalue the idea that posting something and seeing that people liked it makes you feel good. Like I'm always going to be here for that. And there's a whole other conversation to be had about the various ways in which that can go sideways. But I'm a natural optimist, and I love that part of the internet. I really do.
My question was more so about devaluing like that feeling that you get when people are interested in the work that you create. I guess it's more so like the connection that you can draw between being rewarded for your content monetarily and being rewarded for your content in likes.
But it's intention. It's like, what's your goal? Like, what do you want? If you want money, then like you're gonna be upset when you don't get it. If you want attention, I mean, I don't know. It's really relative to the individual. I think. I don't think that there's like one sum all answer that solves that.
No, I mean, just to kind of add to the conversation, I was going to say that, Jenna wrote about Madeline Breckles, and, she was posting her personal search history. And there are different artists that have actually used algorithms and data to actually, as a part of their artistic practice. And a lot of it, well, for her more specifically, because she actually, used Tumblr to show that artwork. So that might be something interesting in terms of like kind of exploring the question that you asked about this economy of like self-worth in relationship to attention. And she wasn't expecting monetization from that, but I think it did get her an actual art exhibition. So it really depends on how you're looking at it, and as Kim mentioned, intentionality.
I think we are actually out of time, which makes me probably everyone's enemy right now. We can continue the conversation out in the public space if y'all are into that. But we have to set up for our next panel, so let's give a round of hand for our speakers.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.